In the last video, we talked about the way Greek society was changing as a result of the way warfare was changing, as a result of the way the Greek economy was changing, and that these changes meant that the merchants in Greek society were able to demand greater participation in the government of their polis. They began by doing this first by demanding that the laws of their polis be written out. So previously, laws had just been remembered through tradition. Who's remembering the laws? The aristocrats. They're the ones who are guiding the tradition and, of course, benefiting themselves. Not everyone is trying to be disingenuous, of course, but of course it happened. And so here we start to find the first check on the power of the aristocrats in the development of law codes that were written out and written down, and that these were considered universal systems of law that applied to everyone, that no one was above the law, no one could form the law for themselves. And so we start to see two resolutions to this situation. One is where the aristocrats make a political alliance with the wealthiest merchants. And they'll work together and they'll maintain control of the polis and be the leaders and the government of the city. And this approach is called oligarchy. In other cities where the aristocrats refuse to yield power to the merchants, we find the merchants joining forces with the peasants and creating a more powerful alliance, overthrowing the aristocrats and establishing a tyrant who would defend their interests. And so the tyrant here, the word tyrant, has a really bad connotation for us in the modern world. But at this time, it simply meant rule by a single person. So a single individual would rule over this society, and they were supposedly supporting the rights of the merchants and the peasants against the aristocrats, against the entrenched, powerful class. However, it's also true to say that tyranny was much less stable. Tyrannies were much less stable than oligarchies. Oligarchies actually provided a pretty stable and peaceful form of government. Tyrannies were commonly overthrown and were notably unstable. The other development of Greek history that we need to talk about before we close out this week is the development of literature. And so we find during this period that the great works of literature, like the Iliad and the Odyssey that we attribute to Greek society and to ancient Greek culture, were written down for the first time during this period. As I explained, these have been handed down orally during the Dark Ages and now are being written down for the first time. We also find other works like Hesiod, who writes down the myths about the gods, that also have been handed on orally. And we also find lyric poetry that's being produced at this time in the famous Aesop's Fables, also date from this period. So there's a huge explosion of Greek literature and Greek achievement during this time. There's also an explosion of Greek scientific thought. Now, where does this come from? This comes from the Greek colonies, and especially from Anatolia, where the Athenians had fled at the beginning of the Dark Age. They flee to Anatolia and they start to come more and more in contact with ancient Middle Eastern cultures that we talked about, and in particular the Babylonians and Babylonian scientific achievement. And so we start to find the Greeks using some of the scientific knowledge of the Babylonians, but to ask different questions. Where the Babylonians were always very practical. How can we use math to divide up the field, math and geometry, in ways so that we can divide up the fields evenly? How can we use it to measure the days? For the Greeks, they are asking much bigger questions. They're asking, how can we use mathematics and geometry to understand the universe, to understand the structure of the universe? And so we start to see a growing confidence in the Greeks that there is something rational about the universe that the human intellect can understand. And this is a reflection of these great discoveries of math and science that are taking place at this time. Growing confidence on the part of the Greeks that they can understand the world, they can understand this society that they are a part of, they can understand the universe that they're a part of, and that human reason enables them to do that. And so these are some of the great achievements of the Greeks that we associate with the Archaic Age: literature, science, and the expansion of Greek influence throughout the society. And this leads to a confidence on the part of the Greeks that they can understand that the world that they're a part of through the use of their human reason. Also, it reflects the competitive, individualistic desire for greatness on the part of the Greeks that we associate with Greek culture, and also the Greek philosophical approach to try and understand the world more generally that they are a part of, to understand it in a more abstract way, which is a hallmark of the development of Western civilization, Western philosophical thought, which is part of what makes ancient Greece, the history of ancient Greece, ancient Greek culture so important. Hope you enjoyed this material and look forward to telling you a little more about ancient Greece in the Golden Age next week.